Guys. So, through the course of this pandemic, I've had a few people have conversations with me about what herd immunity is, and it seems to be coming up a lot more here recently. So, I thought I would make a quick video to explain what herd immunity is. So, what is it to start with? So, the definition I like to use is preventing the spread of a disease by reducing the number of hosts available. So, when we think about diseases and specifically viruses like this coronavirus is, all that virus wants to do is replicate to get from one place to another. So a virus is going to virus. It's going to do its thing. And as long as there is someone else who can be infected, that person is going to be infected, right? So if no one in the population is immune yet, then everybody has the potential of getting the disease. So at the very beginning of the pandemic, when this new virus showed up, nobody was immune, and so everybody could get infected, and a lot of people did at the beginning. But the idea of herd immunity is once a certain amount of the population becomes immune, we prevent that virus from finding a new host. So, if you're infected and you're walking around and you see two people, that virus is going to want to jump from you to that next person to get them infected. So it can, grow up and have more babies and do all of its virus things. But if those two people you run into are already immune, the virus has nowhere to go. And so we stop the virus in its tracks and prevent it from spreading from person to person. So different diseases have different levels of the population that has to be immune to achieve herd immunity, and it all is calculated based on a number called R naught. So the R naught value is how many, on average, people someone who is infected can infect, right? So if the R naught is 1, then for every person who is infected, they only usually infect one other person, right? So it's an average. So you end up with numbers like 1.12. So obviously you're not infecting 0.12 of a person, but it's just an average of the number of people who've become infected. So different diseases have different R naughts. When we look at things like measles, measles has an R naught of around 12, like 12 to 18. So in order to stop measles, we have to really get a lot of people who are immune to it, right? So if we plug that into our equation, the 1 minus 1 over R naught, we end up for measles needing to have somewhere around 92 to 94% of the population immune to measles before we can stop its community spread. So for COVID, with our R naughts that we have currently, our population that we are required to get to have herd immunity has been estimated to be around 60 to 70% of the population. And when we look at a place like the United States, that ends up being over 200 million Americans that are immune to COVID. So that means they have caught it and their bodies have fought it off. We have antibodies or T cells or whatever we have left over to help fight it, and then you are immune to it. So we need to get 60 to 70% of our population immune to COVID before we can stop its community spread. Now, the good thing about this, or the positive spin we can put on this, is that we can change that R naught value. So through our behaviors, we can change R naught. So if you are wearing masks and staying home and not exposing other people when you are sick, then you are less likely to pass on the virus, right? So you are going to reduce that R naught. You're going to reduce the number of people that you are infecting by taking those safety precautions, right? So we can change that number and change what our percent is necessary for herd immunity, okay? Now, second question, how do we actually achieve herd immunity? So there's two ways to do this. First of all, option 1 is through infection. So just letting COVID spread throughout the population and reach that 60 to 70% of the population, or those millions of people who have caught it and have survived and now have the antibodies, the T cells, to protect them from getting COVID again. So we can let that happen. However, with our current estimated CFR, which is our case fatality rate, so the number of people who die after being or having a positive test for COVID, that calculates out to be 1 to 4 million Americans dying as we are achieving herd immunity. Now, we can change that number though. We can change the CFR. Again, kind of like R0 through our behaviors and through things that we can do. So to change the CFR, to change the number of people who are dying after they have tested positive, we can increase our treatments. So we can develop new drugs, new interventions that will allow people to not die from catching COVID, which is great, right? And we are on the pathway to do that, but we don't have anything that is super effective yet. But hopefully, as the pandemic continues, that CFR can be reduced as we are developing new treatments for this disease. The other thing that helps change that CFR is finding out how many people are actually testing positive. Or let me word that a different way. Finding out the number of people in the population who are actually positive, right? So if we find out that there are a whole lot more people who are asymptomatic, that haven't been tested, then that CFR goes down, right? Because there'll be more people who have COVID who are surviving and aren't actually dying of the disease, right? So that CFR can change and does change throughout a pandemic. So that 1 to 4 million Americans dying is the estimate that we have now, but it doesn't necessarily mean that is always going to be the number that we have to reach herd immunity. All right, the other thing to think about with that is that 1 to 4 million Americans dying is the fatality rate, but we are still learning what the long-term effects of COVID are. So the long-term effect may not be death, but it may be other things that we are finding out as we go. All right. Option 2 of how to reach herd immunity, and this is my preferred option, is through vaccines. So vaccines are used to develop immunity in people without them actually catching the disease, right? So we are injecting them with something, and different vaccines work different ways, but we are injecting them with something to activate their immune system, to educate their immune system, so they'll start producing those antibodies. So they will then be immune, and if they are exposed to COVID later, they'll be able to fight it, right? However, vaccines are not 100% effective, right? So it's possible that you get a vaccine, but your body doesn't mount a really good immune response to it. So maybe you got the vaccine, but you're not immune. And also, different vaccines have different efficacy rates. So we're looking at different thresholds for the different vaccines that are being produced. So we're hoping that a vaccine that is produced will have a high efficacy rate so that we know that when we vaccinate people with it, that they are actually going to become immune. But if we still need to get 60 to 70% of our population immune, we are going to have to vaccinate over 60 to 70% of the population so that we will actually reach that 60 to 70%, if that makes sense. And we want them vaccinated quickly, right? Because we want to develop this herd immunity so that we can return to life more as it was before, right? So we have to reach that 60 to 70% quickly. Another thing to think about is that 60 to 70% that we have now is in place with our mandates that we have currently, right? So it's in place with all the social distancing we've been doing and all the mask wearing we've been wearing and the mask wearing we've been doing and stuff like that. So if we want to return back to some of our previous activities, we need a vaccination rate even higher than that, right? To change that R, because the R0 is going to change the number of people that can be infected, because we aren't doing all those other measures. So, all that to say, herd immunity is a great thing. It would be great if we could reach herd immunity. It would really slow down the spread of COVID. It would protect those who are more vulnerable. There are two ways of achieving herd immunity. One way requires less death, which is a good thing, I think. And vaccines will also help protect those in our population who are vulnerable, right? So the elderly, those with pre-existing conditions, things like that, who can't remove themselves completely from society if we have 60 to 70% of the population that has caught this, right? All right. Let me know if you have any questions. Um, I'll be happy to answer them.